if you don't mind indulging me slightly, I'm actually what you might describe as a bit of a water addict. So I have a boat there, and I don't even need to say thankfully we've all got life jackets on, because we all wear life jackets. We always have. And I'm very much one of the at-risk people here. I'm a 50-something male with a boat, and they feature fairly poorly in the statistics there. So, and there's my family, my son and daughter. We've got a swimming pool, love whitewater rafting, water skiing, you name it. We love doing it on the waterways. I'm not so good a fisherman, that's all. So, which means I don't need to do to bars. I go over bars out in the sea. So yeah, we're Kiwis. We're surrounded by a lot of water, and a lot of us spend a lot of time on the water, mainly in the summer, but also in the winter months. So I thought I'd give a little bit of medical background, as in the definition of what drowning is. It's a process resulting in the primary respiratory impairment from submersion or immersion in a liquid medium. So it sounds very dry. Or death by suffocation after submersion in a liquid. And it describes the deaths that occur less than 24 hours after the event, because subsequent to 24 hours, it's going to be secondary to complications such as lung injury, brain injury, and infection, kidney failure. And the term asphyxia describes specifically insufficient oxygen-carbon dioxide exchange on a ventilatory basis. Again, these are sort of slightly dry definitions, but I think it helps sort of frame a little bit of thinking about what we're talking about. It can occur just with gas inhalation. If you've got too much gas and not enough oxygen is getting in, carbon monoxide and the like, that can cause asphyxiation. And hypoxia is the main term of what actually causes the death. That's specifically lack of oxygen. The brain is a fairly simple organ. It just needs oxygen and glucose, and if you starve it of either, it runs out of steam pretty rapidly. And so medically, the terms wet and dry drowning used to be described. We don't use those anymore because they're quite varying terms. The dry drowning was the laryngospasm, followed by the asphyxia, hypoxia, and then the water. Then that relaxed, and the lungs might flood afterwards, but the lungs weren't flooded primarily, and it just causes confusion. So, and it used to be there was sort of 85% were wet and 15% dry, but those aren't terms that really we use anymore. And yeah, look, this is a big issue with some. Our figures are slightly different to the international figures, which I'll touch on. It's the second most common cause of death in children internationally, but fortunately our rates in children are actually quite low, which is really, really good, and I think pool fences clearly have gone a long way to help with that. So again, as I've said, hypoxia or lack of oxygen seems to be the primary issue. People will panic. The struggling will potentially make things worse. With the breathing, they'll hyperventilate and or hold their breath. But then you've got, as the people are underwater, they obviously become apneic, and various things ensue. The heart responds either by going very, very slow or very, very fast. And one thing of interest when it comes to resuscitation is ventricular fibrillation is actually relatively uncommon. That's the cardiac arrest rhythm. And we all know that there are certain things that really, really help, and defibrillators are very, very helpful, but in drowning situations, not so much. So, and then anywhere between 20 seconds and 5 minutes, you reach the break point, and then breathing ensues. And as soon as anything goes anywhere near your epiglottis or the top of your larynx, you get immediate laryngospasm, and everything all blocks off. And I'm sure we've all experienced situations where you've accidentally, not swallowed your fluid very well, and you choke, and it's actually, it's just quite frightening when it occurs. But that is a very powerful reflex. You have no control over it, and that will sort of shut things off. And then subsequently, the fluid will then be inhaled once that laryngospasm relaxes. And then fluid in the lungs causes really, really significant damage. There is actually no difference between salt water and fresh water in terms of drownings also. So it all causes damage to the lungs, and really quite significant damage. So there are various other issues that we need to consider. So when you're dealing with drowning victims, you need to think about a lot of these issues, particularly trauma, particularly spinal, when it comes to people that have dived into shallow water. However, really, whilst we need to think about cervical spine injuries, they're actually very, very rare, and I think one of the really main key points I want to get across to the audience is that don't let paranoia about cervical spine injury delay starting basic life support. BLS and starting it early is one of the key messages from providers of hospital and pre-hospital care. So you need to be aware of it. It's 0.5% overall and very, very rare and under 5, so don't delay BLS or basic life support. And you know, there's been some tragedies. I've spent a lot of time water skiing on Lake Karapiro, and there's the cross halfway down the long strength of that young doctor who jumped off the rocks into the river. This river is surprisingly dangerous, and again, I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted in here, but with the current, which is not really strong but relatively strong, and the branches that catch people's legs and whatever and sort of haul them under and trap them. And I also work for the police, and not infrequently people jump in the river to evade police and don't come back. So it looks like a calm piece of water. It's a lovely piece of water. It's a gem of our city, but it does cause some harm. And as we'll see later, there's not insignificant injuries that come and statistics in rivers in New Zealand are the most dangerous place where lives are lost. So in terms of the sort of injuries that we get, just those pictures there, the two pictures on the right there are from Darwin. I was up there and I was driving in this beautiful national park, and I wasn't quite sure whether that says crocodiles only swim in designated areas, whether that was a message to crocodiles or a message to me. But anyway, I did jump off that waterfall. It was quite a cool experience. Lovely, clear water. You could see deep in it, so you always check it out beforehand before you jump in. And then there's the gem of Lake Taupō that we have down there. We spend a lot of time on that lake, and it's a beautiful piece of lake. And again, that lake claims a few lives for people just not taking simple precautions such as safety equipment and life jackets. So some of the injuries that we see, and I see here, fractures, dislocations. There's quite and this will be in motorised sport, water skiing, wakeboarding, etc. Femurs, ankles, the water ski boots now for the slalom skiers, where you get these double boots, and they're quite solidly in there. You see some really, really nasty foot and ankle injuries out of there. And if you can imagine having that injury when your feet are both locked into water ski and you fall over, you haven't got a life jacket on, it gets pretty uncomfortable if you're trying to tread water. But all the water skiing that I do, the club belong to Karapiro Water Ski Club, are absolutely religious about wearing a life jacket. Nobody would be allowed to if they weren't wearing a life jacket. It's just frowned on. As I said, that over 50 male psyche thing about wearing life jackets still seems to be an issue. Dislocations, shoulder dislocations, pretty common. I've got a good mate who's dislocated his shoulder 3 or 4 times. He's had it operated on, and then lo and behold, he dislocated his other shoulder. And again, coming off and having to tread water, it's pretty uncommon if one of your arms is out of action. Wounds, we get obstacles in the water, people headbutting water skis as they fall, and concussion. I've had skiers in the river here that have been spun around and they've lost control and swung into the bank, and various branches penetrated various nether regions and what have you, which was pretty uncomfortable. So it's a river that you need to treat with respect. It's got a lot of obstacles in it. It flows and there's a lot of obstacles just under the water. It's very, very interesting actually. I've got a depth sound as you sort of zoom along the river and go from 20 metres deep to 2 metres deep, fairly rapidly. You can't really tell because of the colour. Concussion is an issue that we're taking very seriously in rugby, and we're seeing a lot of it in a lot of other sports as well, and a bit of it in water skiing. Some of these skiers are going pretty fast, and wakeboarders, and they're doing the jumps and the acrobatics. So again, concussion is something that an injury we see. And degloving, just was aware of an international slalom skier who actually ripped all the muscles and skin of their arm off in an accident. So you can get some pretty nasty accidents. So the presentations to the to hospital a little bit varied. So I'll just talk about a few of the other variables there. In the picture there, I've got a picture of a very good friend of mine, William Pike, on a mountain. You're wondering what on earth being on a mountain has to do with his talk, but it's about the hypothermia that you can get from water, and falling through the ice is a real issue. And even just in winter time, you can get hypothermic. And William was the gentleman who was stuck up on Mount Ruapehu, and his core body temperature got 25 degrees, and actually that was protective of brain and heart, and he survived that ordeal. So 66 minutes, I believe, is the longest submersion injury from which they've had a successful resuscitation for somebody falling through ice, and they've got a lot of experience about that in obviously Canada and Scandinavia. So it can be quite protective, that cold. But otherwise, there's a lot of other damage that can occur. Usually, shock, which would be due to blood loss, and that's external as opposed to internal, but can be lung damage, I've alluded to. Electrolyte aberrations due to sort of swallowed salt water is a little bit of a, not really so much of an issue because you need to drink quite a lot of it, and the human kidneys can't deal with it. But it generally doesn't cause damage unless you take a lot of it. And as I alluded to, there's no real difference in stats between fresh and salt water in terms of the ultimate damage. The other things that we need to think about are medical issues. So things like, have they had a seizure in order for them to fall into the water, or that a diabetic suddenly become hypoglycemic, had an arrhythmia, and also alcohol consumption clearly is a thing that I'll talk a little bit about. So there's all these kind of other issues that we think about in people that come to hospital. Obviously, significantly more come to hospital. The ones that drown, unfortunately, don't. But the injuries and medical issues we have to think about, and infection, water in a lot of different areas, particularly in some polluted areas, but even in unpolluted areas, water carries a lot of infection risk that you need to take account of, and the ones that come to hospital having injured themselves. So I'll just touch very, very briefly on Scuba, because it's an entire subject in itself, obviously, but clearly there must be some people in the room that are interested in this. You've got your middle ear squeeze, your pulmonary barotrauma if people hold their breath while ascending, and the arterial gas embolus, which is where the air gets introduced into the pulmonary capillaries and then causes the mild end of the spectrum is just the bends that kind of causes that pain and what have you. But the severe end is the massive collapse and stroke, which occurs within minutes, 0 to 20 minutes or so of surfacing. It's sudden, dramatic, and life-threatening. And then the nitrogen narcosis. So there's obviously a smattering of diving events that occur, and something that's relatively regulated. And obviously there are those that do so professionally. It's not doesn't feature very, very high, and in the Waikato we don't see obviously so much of it. We do occasionally, people that dive overseas then get in planes and what have you that don't understand the issue about not being able to fly immediately after a deep dive and those sorts of things. So again, there's some pressure issues we need to think about. So just looking at the international epidemiology, so in 2012, WHO report, 140,000 children under the age of 15 died as a result of drowning, making it the leading cause of accidental death in that age group worldwide, and 63% of those are males. Talk about the fact that males are fairly well represented in this group. The under fives are drowning in baths, pools, fish ponds, and obviously even something as benign as a bucket. Older children in private swimming pools, garden ponds, and inland waterways. Oceans, obviously pretty dangerous, can be dangerous, and rips. And just that, the little picture down in the corner there is my son and I on Wilson's Promontory about 15 years ago now, down on the very southern tip of mainland Australia. And we sat on that little rock there and just after that we took that photo. Saw a fellow. It was a surf beach with a 1.5 metre swell, but very, very clear, and a gentle swell. We'd been body surfing in there, and we sat up on these rocks, and just beneath us was you could just clearly see it. We had about 10 metres of elevation, not too much, and you could see the rip coming out beside the rocks. And again, those of us that know beaches know that's a commonplace for us. And surfers jump into these to go out, to come in on the waves. And anyway, so I saw this guy He was wearing a wetsuit, no life jacket, and his son was wearing a wetsuit, was on a boogie board, and the son was lying on the boogie board. And he was swimming as hard as he could in towards the beach, but was going very rapidly backwards, that way. And it was just quite interesting to see, to look down and watch this occurring. You don't often get that bird's eye view. But what enabled me to do is I ran into the beach, got my fins and went out, and then I just, classically just swam into the rip, grabbed him, hauled him back out, and then it was very, very easy. He was down there, he couldn't see it, hauled him back in. And I took him into the beach, and he was very, very tired and very, very thankful. And his wife was coming down the beach, and I certainly didn't really expect thanks anyway, but she zoomed straight past me and ripped into him. So anyway, he was just thankful. But it was just one of those situations where you kind of see something happening from a bird's eye view, and you do something about it. But yeah, he was on his way out, and he was getting very, very tired. So he wasn't intoxicated, obviously, but alcohol, a major issue and recurring issue in a lot of these fatalities. So this is your fine report for 2016. There's some slight differences in the way between the way we report stuff. We go 1st of January, 31st of December. The Australians go July to June. Don't quite know the pros and cons of the different way of doing it. Obviously a good report. So you'll know all these figures. 107 deaths, 78 deemed to be preventable. The non-preventable being as a result of road or air accidents, homicide, suicide, or unknown. And now that is 2.38 deaths per 100,000 population. You have to hold that figure in your mind when we talk about Australia. But I'm not sure. Again, I don't quite know because if you only include the 78, it's 1.7 per 100,000. But anyway, we'll call it 2.38. And so the road toll is just under 7 deaths per 100,000 people, and is 77% male. So you've still got this heavy male predominance, and the road causing a fair bit more damage. But drowning is kind of up there in New Zealand compared to internationally. And the age ranges in New Zealand are pretty even, as you can see across the ages. But fortunately, there's relatively few in the very young age group. But otherwise, it's pretty well spread across, and 86% male. And the other interesting statistics: Māori and Pacifica. Māori is 22%. They only represent 14% of the population. In Pacifica, people 17% only represent 11% of the population. And Asians, a lot of people think of Asians, Pacific people like fishing from rocks and what have you. There was 2015, I think there was 10 Asians that were drowned, but then 0, I believe, in 3 in 2016. So it's something that fluctuates a little bit. So in that time, we had 207 hospitalisations. And I'll show you the graph shortly, but that's going up and up. It's kind of in line with all hospitalisations for all matters. People come to hospital. Obviously, you get to hospital. If you're in good shape, you're going to stay in good shape. But if you're still unconscious and in a coma, things don't look so good. But yeah, they're going up and up. And the male-female ratios in hospitalisations is 2/3 male, 1/3 female. And the largest portion of hospitalisations is in under 5, so those accidents potentially in smaller bodies of water. And the other thing about the hospitalisation statistics is only those that stay in hospital for more than 24 hours. Obviously, we see in the emergency department many people that we see monitor, assess, and then send home. The admission rate overall from emergency departments in New Zealand is about 35% admitted, so 65% discharged. But of the ones, these sorts of patients that we see, we're going to be discharging a whole heap. So that hospitalisations of greater than 24 hours is going to be the more significant ones, and I would suggest somewhere between 5 and 10 times that amount would go there with that are there in emergency departments. And we're looking to try and codify this information, because there's so much information that we can gather and feed back to groups like yourselves that we're very, very poor at. So we're going to lobby the new government to try and get a unified coding of some of the stuff that comes through emergency departments. So, and there you can see it graphically. The red line there shows the increase in hospitalisations, and the lines going down are the drowning stats. So they are improving, but obviously there's still some work to do. So a bit more New Zealand epidemiology. Picture down there was Hooker Falls, where I was not canoeing, I've never canoed, I will never canoe. The other day I was mountain biking around it, but and that was a canoeist, and I don't know the back story to it, that was caught I think halfway down the falls, and it's just a place you do not want to be. Female, and she was hauled off by helicopter, and I think probably extraordinarily lucky. They were running very, very high last week, the Hooker Falls. So unintentional river immersion is the largest cause of preventable deaths in this country. So rivers 23, beaches 21, tidal waters 16, offshore 11, pools 6, which is 3 public, 3 private, and 1 in lakes. Some stats by region there. You can see Northland just worse than Waikato, worse than Auckland, and 0 in Gisborne. So again, this is the sort of thing that perhaps will fluctuate a wee bit, and 1 year's stats aren't going to be as meaningful as a whole 10 years worth added together. Yeah, I think it's great that the under 5 fatalities are so low, but 42 hospitalisations in that age group is double, but I think we've done some really good work in water safety for the young. And so there you go, you see another split of the New Zealand demographics with immersion incidents, but presumably the immersion incident is where that's unintentionally they're in the water, where swimming they're intentionally in the water. And the powerboat ones, again, are something sort of quite close to my heart. They're all male, and just under half are over 55 and not wearing a life jacket. And this is just something that we need to get into the New Zealand psyche, that it's okay to wear a life jacket, that would save a number of lives. Land-based fishing 5, all male, 80% European, so not necessarily the Asian Pacifica Māori that people might think in their minds, and 75% of those land-based fishermen no life jackets and were fishing alone, and just 2 kayakers in rivers. They all had safety gear. I believe there was 8 in 2015. But of all the kayaking and river rafting that I've done, all of the organised commercial is wonderfully well protected and safe, and I've always felt completely safe with them. So I think we regulate well. We weren't so good at that. 20 years ago there was a lot of stuff that was very poorly regulated. You go down to Queensland and say, I think I'll jump off a cliff with a paraplank today. One of those paraglider things, and you could do it without any kind of minimal safety gear, minimal instruction. I think we've got a lot better at that, which is good. So I just wanted to run through a bit of the Australian data, because I think it serves as a little bit of comparison for us. So 280 people drowned in Australian waterways, and their year was so July 15 to June 16, with a population of 24 million. That's 1.17 deaths per 100,000 compared to our 2.38, although not quite sure whether their death rate is purely if they've already taken off the what are deemed as the non-preventable. But I still think that ours is somewhat worse. Theirs 83% male, ours 86. Their deaths occur all year round, but peak in January. 25% of deaths, all deaths occur on a Sunday, and 45% of deaths occur between midday and 6 p.m. So just kind of slightly strange statistics that you can sort of deal with in terms of how you're going to prevent things. So there's their graphics, sort of similar to us. New South Wales, the deadliest state, their numbers relatively flat, but again heavily male predominated. Swimming, recreating, boating only 16%, falls into water 14%, their average about 280, and trending slightly down. So locations, thought it served as a difference to ours. Inland waterways, we've got a lot more of those than we do. 15% in swimming pools, up to 20% at beaches, 30% in harbours, 23-24% were swimming or recreating, 21% of results of falls into water unintentional, 16% using watercraft, whereas ours 18% powered craft. So I think the Australians like water, but they've got a lot of central landmass, but 90% of the population live within 100 kilometres of the ocean there, but just a slightly differing statistics that was sort of interesting to look at. I've got some 7-year stats from Queensland. They had 1,100 drownings, 72% in pools. So again, I think the fact that our pools rate so low is a testament, I believe, to pool fencing, which I think is a very, very good thing. 65% of pool drownings in private pools, 35% in public. So what I want to move on to now a little bit is treatment at the scene, and just a few key messages I think would be great to get across to you in the room, and then you to take out to your various groups and to the public in general. Is BLS, basic life support, and it's just basic. You don't need to be an expert, and there's some things that really help. So obviously, moving from the water, being conscious of trauma, but don't let that delay the start of your CPR in a situation where the person is unconscious, because basic life support and time to initial resuscitation, I'll come up with some figures just shortly, is very, very important. So think about cervical spine injury, but don't delay it. So doctor's ABC is danger, so make sure that people rushing to get somebody out of a pool don't injure themselves or slip over and fall over. There's not electric wires, whatever. Response, check for response in the person. S, send for help, so shout for help, call 111. Then airway, breathing. C for circulation or start CPR, 30 chest compressions to 2. And then D for defibrillation. As I've said, it's not such an issue, ventricular fibrillation, but you can still, an older person can have a medical event, fall into the pool, and be in ventricular fibrillation. So early starting resuscitation is a key to survival, if it's going to be survival, and particularly in these ones around swimming pools. And defibrillation if possible, and think about trauma, but don't let it slow down the rest of what you're doing. So, we need to know some of the factors that have occurred pre-hospital as we start resuscitating them. So was there any trauma? What was the time to first resuscitation? So when were they last seen? I've seen quite a number of medical events, like a child, quite recently, who was swimming length training in the morning with their school and had a seizure. Went to the bottom of the pool, was picked up pretty rapidly, and BLS was started at the scene. Unfortunately, there was a doctor at the scene, and they started BLS pretty rapidly, and the kid was awake and talking by the time they got into us, sort of kind of wondering what went on. So just being wary of these medical events. Time to first spontaneous breath is an important issue as well, and transport times, how long it's taken them to get into hospital. Another somewhat unfortunate thing that we need to think about is when the children come in from home having had a bath incident, is there the possibility of non-accidental injury or deliberate submersion. So these are the sort of prognostic factors that we're thinking about. So the Orlovsky scale, I can't name the scale, but all the parts in it, it's put together, the various parts in it, is just trying to sort of quantify it a wee bit. So if you have some of these factors, more of these factors, the worse your prognosis is going to be. So age under 3, and presumably they're less able to make sort of rescue efforts for themselves, or possibly what infants have a very powerful dive reflex, and their pulse slows very, very rapidly, and they hold their breath as soon as they dive underwater. You can sort of, you've sort of seen that with infants. Submersion for more than 5 minutes, and if you've been submerged for more than 10 minutes, very, very poor survival indeed, although 66 minutes and a fall through the ice, but that was very much the exception. No rescue attempts for greater than 10 minutes. I think that's a key learning point. Coma on arrival in ED, so if you're deeply unconscious by the time you come to ED, sometime after the drowning event, the actual event, that is a very poorly prognostic. Metabolic acidosis is blood parameters of somebody that's been hypoxic for a long time. So if you've only got 1 or 2 of these points there, the survival is 90%. But if you've got 4 or more, it's 5%. So early resuscitative efforts, something that's quite a key that I wanted to get across. And yeah, the first respiratory effort, that sort of cough, splutter, and person taking a spontaneous breath themselves, less than 3 minutes from the start, prognosis is very, very good. And if it hasn't happened for 40 minutes, that's not so good. Another anecdote, this was in Melbourne in winter, a number of years ago. A 4-year-old child fell into a swimming pool, and we did CPR on the child, including pre-hospital and in hospital, for 45 minutes. And the child would get a bit of a rhythm and then not, and we had a tube and we were ventilating and oxygenating, doing the best we can. 1 week later, the child walks out neurologically intact. Great. I tried to find a newspaper clipping, but it was too long ago. It was one of those wonderful stories. I clearly remember sitting there. We just carried on. So 45 minutes is a long time to do CPR, given that, in most older people, you might go for 5 or 10 minutes, but certainly not much longer. So anyway, that was a great rescue. So this kid, this was in winter. I think the kid had been chilled, and there was a bit of neuroprotective, and we had some good CPR. You'd be amazed at how good CPR can be. I've had numerous patients where they've had a cardiac arrest in front of me in the emergency department. The last couple where they'd been in the department for like 30 seconds, and I was just talking to them to work out what's going on. They clutched their chest, keeled over, and you start doing CPR on them, and we hook them up to a monitor, and then VF, that's where the ventricles are fibrillating. And you're doing CPR on them, and they're reaching out and grabbing your hands, and in one case, he was grabbing my leg, saying, stop. And I knew he was in VF, and I stopped doing CPR. Then he's immediately dead again, and then you start doing CPR. So those hearts that have only just stopped are really, so minutes count. And we slapped the defib on, zapped them, and the last two, got them back. So actually, you can get pretty good cardiac output if they've immediately arrested in front of you by doing decent CPR. So 100 to 120 per minute, third of the depth of the chest, in the middle of the chest, 30 compressions, 2 breaths. A really key thing that I think a lot of people need to learn about. So early BLS, an absolute key there. So this is again moving on to some of the prevention goals, because of course prevention is going to be top of the list of what we're needing to do, and they're looking at different life stages. So the children under the age of 15 is not so much of a problem for us, but we need to carry on and be very, very safe around water. And whilst we've got a swimming pool, also our property has a non-fenced culvert right down. We're rural property, so down the side of the property. And if you let a child wander and what have you, there's all, whilst your pool's fenced, there are other things, and buckets and paddling pools and things like that you need to be very careful of. Young people, 15 to 40 odd, men are clearly an at-risk group that we need to address, and people over 65. And then the high-risk locations for them was inland waterways, coastal waters, and the aquatic industry. And then the key challenges, alcohol and drugs and their influence, boating, watercraft, looking at high-risk populations. And then extreme weather events is an issue, both sides of the Tasman, floods, people that think that they can get across flooded rivers and what have you, tramping and the like. So I just thought that was sort of expressed quite well. So the multi-sectorial nature of drowning, as it says up there, means that there's no real kind of single point, no single agency that's responsible, no single group of people that are way overrepresented, well, other than males, but they're kind of across all the different sort of areas. So the solution to reducing drowning is unlike the rest of one organisation, one strategy, or a particular government department or jurisdiction. So it's right. It's obviously great to have people in the room here from a variety of different areas that want to know about statistics and what we can do about it. And clearly, safety around rivers, watercraft, fishing is something we can do very well. Continue our safety around pools, so yeah, key points just in conclusion are prevention. So continue with strategies around life jackets. It doesn't take very long. I mean, I grew up in the days when nobody wore a life jacket, nobody wore a bike helmet when riding. And now we're just completely comfortable with wearing bike helmets. So there's a little bit of kind of minor protest on the fringes, but ski helmets. I learned to snow ski without wearing a helmet. Skied for 30 years without a ski helmet, and then suddenly I just couldn't ski without a helmet. And so it just, you get that critical mass, and you've got to get people used to wearing life jackets in small craft. And safety around our rivers. We've got a lot of rivers in this country, and some of them are very, very fast and dangerous. So we talk about finding target populations, males. I think people will be surprised. So it only just came up on the road. I didn't realise the road toll was so heavily skewed towards male as well, 77% male. And I certainly didn't realise this was in excess of 80% male in the drowning statistics. And clearly, life jackets, very, very important. Just when you hear stories of people going out of a bar, I mean, life jackets in rivers, life jackets in lakes, and most of the lakes are unbelievably safe. But you know, going over a bar and out in the ocean, I just struggle to realise why anybody would not wear one. It defies comprehension. But so we'll get there. As we've got with bike helmets, you know, 95+% of the population wear cycle helmets. I don't know about skiing. Maybe 70 to 80% of skiers and boarders wear ski helmets, and we can get there with life jackets just by normalising it. And it's not some sort of nerdy thing. Alcohol, something that is particularly impactful in younger, but all age groups. You know, jumping into the beach once you've had a few drinks on New Year's Eve, supervision of toddlers in those target areas, rivers clearly somewhere we need to make people very aware of. You know, so you know, your report's fantastic. It'd be great that it was more, if it was more widely known about. That's through no fault of your own, and you know, boats and beaches, and learn BLS, teach BLS to your family, start it early. Okay, thank you very much.